Let's welcome in a special guest, Benjamin Heelan, who is the co-head of Developed EMEA Aerospace, Defense and Capital Goods Research at BofA Securities, joins us right now on the show. Benjamin, good having you. Thanks so much for joining in. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing your name correctly.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for having me.
No, the pleasure is entirely ours. So Benjamin, tell us, as unfortunate as it is, but geopolitical stress as it develops brings out importance of all of these ecosystems and the companies within that ecosystem, right? The last 3 years have been marked by extreme geopolitical events continuously being present. We are almost co-living with such. How does that make, or how does that augur for investability into this ecosystem?
Yeah, I think that what you are seeing is a move from governments everywhere into a decade of hard power, right? If you take Europe as an example, I think Europe for a very, very long time has relied on soft power, has allowed the defense industrial base to get to quite a depleted, quite a challenging level. We've been rebuilding since the invasion of Ukraine in about 2022. But it's really in the last 6 months since the new US administration has started to put a lot of pressure on Europe to basically step up and pay for its own defenses. And I think the big trigger for European leaders was not being invited to those initial peace discussions between the US and Russia. And clearly that was a recognition, I think, from a European perspective, that we need to start to rebuild our hard power. That's a defense industrial base. That's the technology that goes into defense equipment, and make sure we're investing in the highest tech equipment, and making sure that we're investing, that we have enough of the equipment that we need on the shelves as a deterrent. And I just don't think Europe as a whole was really doing a lot of that. In terms of what it means from an investing perspective, I think that if you take Europe in isolation, you have 10 years plus of very, very significant structural growth ahead of you as Europe goes through a rebuilding of its defences. And I don't think that's just about Europe. I think you're seeing a focus on sovereignty. You have Australia with the AUKUS Strategic Pact, which is about reinvesting in their naval and submarine industrial base. You have Japan investing in their global combat air program with some of my companies. You're seeing this from a lot of countries globally, that they're wanting to move forward with reindustrializing their defense industrial base, driving a degree of strategic autonomy, reclaiming a degree of sovereignty of the defense industrial base. And so I think for the defense industry globally, we're going to have 10 years where we see very, very strong growth. Yeah.
Got it. So Benjamin, here's therefore the question, right? The way warfare is happening right now and the way the spends are happening, you rightly put, I believe I read a headline overnight that the US is encouraging Australia to up its spending on GDP to 3.5, spending on defense to be 3.5% of GDP. And Europe is doing that. I'm guessing India has allocated, I think, another 50,000 crore rupees of its annual spend to defense spending too. That the traditional defense ecosystems exist, but newer ecosystems are getting developed, right? Drone manufacturers, air defense systems, and from various different countries are now coming to the fore. Are the opportunities a lot more widespread than what they were, let's say, a decade ago or a couple of decades ago?
Yeah, so I think if we take Europe as an example, right, what are the two things we are doing right now in Europe? The first thing we're trying to do is defend that border in Eastern Europe. And I think that what we've realized is that, 5 years ago, if I was on this television show, no one would have assumed that there would be a land war in Europe. And yet we've seen, obviously, a very significant land war in Europe. So you can't forget about the land, the naval, the air domain as they were 10, 15 years ago, right? They're still going to be very core structural parts of how governments think about their own defences. But you're absolutely right. I think there are a number of emerging dynamics that we need to get to grips with here, right? So we're currently going through the capability review in Europe, and a couple of the big and key tenets of that are going to be, to your point, air defence, autonomy, and precision strike. Another angle over the next decade is going to be communications. How do you drive real interoperability between forces? How do you have the person driving the tank at the front line being able to communicate and relay data and information to the person in the aircraft flying a sortie, to the person back at base who's trying to coordinate between everyone? And that integration of different systems is something that has not really been done, but is clearly core. Space is going to be the next key area of investment in warfare, and having the ability to gain access to space for Earth observation, missile defense, communications infrastructure is going to be extremely important. Autonomy, you mentioned it. I think one of the things we've learned from the conflict in Ukraine is that you can be very, very dangerous with very, very low or perceived low tech, right? And so autonomy, whether that be around logistics, whether that be around high-end autonomy or drone systems, but also just very, very low-end, cheap, replaceable systems that you can develop and produce en masse. And that comes down to my final point, which is there's a real asymmetry of warfare debate that is going on. How do you manage these swarms of drones if the only solution we have is costing us tens of millions of dollars every single time we need to defend against these attacks? Then we need a better way of dealing with that asymmetry of warfare. So I think we've seen autonomy and asymmetry of warfare really come together, and I think that is something that we're going to have to find a way of dealing with from a deterrent and a defense perspective over the next decade.
Right, Benjamin. This is Harsh also joining in. You know, the other thing that's really standing out, as you correctly mentioned, was a slightly differentiated set of skills that those manufacturing some of these defense equipments also require. So where are those pockets of possible opportunity emerging at this point? What are those pockets? How should one look at them?
I think your question there was around which are the key areas to invest in over the next kind of five to 10 years. I mean, what you're going to see, I think, is defense electronics and technology have the longest duration investment cycle of any of the subsectors that you could see. So if that's around things like radar production, communications infrastructure, navigation and inertial navigation systems that go into missiles, I think what you'll see is that the investments around defense that will have the longest duration, the most kind of growth power behind them, will be the investments that drive technology, right? And how do you maintain a technological edge over your adversary on a 10-year view? Those are the companies that have that real intellectual property that is going to see the longest duration of growth. That being said, this is a significant investment theme globally, right? You're not just seeing growth in defense spending, but you're seeing governments globally want their own capabilities. They want to be able to produce tanks and aircraft and missiles on their own soil rather than rely on international partnerships. So there are going to be opportunities for, I think, pretty much everybody in the defense sphere, whether they can provide capacity or a capability to governments. So I think longest duration is going to be around defense electronics, technology and intellectual property, but there is still going to be a big opportunity in being able to produce capacity to governments.
Okay, and Benjamin, where does India stack up in the list of countries? I know you clearly suggested that most countries are looking inward, but does India have do Indian companies, one or some of them, have a unique niche which stands out in the global marketplace at this point?
So I think what you will see in India, and my coverage in Europe is spending a lot of time in India, right? Whether that be around partnerships, joint ventures. I know Airbus has put a lot of investment into the region, and I think that that's what you will see over the next decade. Those partnerships, those investments will continue to grow. Maybe in some of those contracts you will see intellectual property transfer. I think that's going to be one of the big dynamics that we could see over the next 3 to 5 years. And I think, what you will see is India will continue to focus on building up a homegrown defence industrial base. I think you would actually find a lot of companies globally would be willing to provide support in terms of that, whether that be in terms of skills, whether that be in terms of investment, and on a medium-term view, intellectual property transfer. You've seen that in a lot of other countries. I think that's something that that you will see here as well, as India will look to build its own industrial base. Yes.
Got it. Benjamin, one final question, and let this not sound only like a defense conversation. You look at capital goods as well, and aerospace too, but I'm going to focus on capital goods, for example. A very good cycle for a lot of companies because of capex that was happening. Then global growth seems to have kind of not stalled really, but come off. Is this a good period for looking at capital goods, looking at what's happening in capex, or would you bide your time for the world and for India if you have a view out there as well?
Yeah, so looking at capex is obviously the revenue line of pretty much all of our companies in capital goods, right? So using capex as an indicator is clearly extremely useful. I think what you're seeing in cap goods right now, there are some industries that are and end markets and verticals that are growing a lot, and there are others that are not, right? So if you're involved in grid infrastructure, if you're involved in gas turbines, if you're involved in providing low voltage or medium voltage equipment into data centers, there is a significant amount of growth, right? If you're involved in general industrial production for the automotive market, for the truck market, for general engineering or manufacturing, the growth is a lot weaker right now and is actually declining from a volume perspective. So I think we see this kind of bifurcation in terms of growth within capital goods. In India, a lot of our companies in Europe are highlighting their exposures to India because those exposures are growing a lot, because the Indian economy is growing a lot, because capex is growing a lot. So I think that we will hear India more and more and more in the transcripts of the capital goods companies that I cover as an opportunity for growth, as a place to deploy capex themselves and invest in the local businesses and the local infrastructure here. But yes, high level, we are seeing this real bifurcation in growth where there are some really attractive subsectors within capital goods where demand is far outstripping supply, gas turbines, grid infrastructure that just two that I highlighted, versus some other automotive, truck, industrial end markets, general engineering that are coming under a bit more pressure.
Okay, we shall leave it at that. Benjamin, thank you so much for taking the time out and speaking to us.
Thank you very much for having me. Appreciate it.